Welcome back to Vintage Mike Tales, beautiful souls, and thank you for being here. This story is for anyone carrying guilt, shame, or a past they can't forget. For anyone who's loved deeply, lost painfully, and wondered if healing is possible. This is the continuation of part 1. Sit back, relax, and let yourself feel every moment of their journey. It had been 7 years since Emily was gone. 7 years since that fatal accident. That night of anger and misunderstanding that had changed everything. Kenneth Stanford still remembered her laughter, bright and impossible to forget, echoing in his mind like a ghost. He had spent years blaming himself for the words left unsaid, the anger he couldn't take back, the life they might have had. Every accomplishment, every quiet moment of peace, had been shadowed by the weight of her memory. And yet, despite the pain, despite the guilt, he had learned to carry it, not as a burden, but as a reminder of love lost, of lessons learned, and of the chance to heal when someone like Stephanie Williams appeared and refused to let him face the world alone. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the city still glistened, every street lamp haloed in mist, every surface reflecting fragments of a world trying to start over. Kenneth stood by the window of his penthouse, a half-empty glass in his hand, staring out at the skyline he once thought he'd conquered. Now it only reminded him of everything he'd lost, and everything he almost ruined. He could still hear her voice from that night in the train station, soft but steady, trembling but brave. "I forgive you." Those words had broken something inside him, but maybe that was the point. Because for years Kenneth had lived behind walls built from guilt and regret. Every success, every deal, every headline, all of it had been a smokescreen for the ache he refused to face. But Stephanie's forgiveness, that wasn't something he could hide from. It was too pure, too undeserved. And now he was terrified of what it demanded of him, the courage to heal. The doorbell broke through his thoughts. He didn't need to ask who it was. She was the only person who ever came without an appointment. When he opened the door, Stephanie stood there, rain-damp curls framing her face, wearing a soft beige coat and that quiet smile that had undone him from the start. "Hi," she said gently. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked, as if she was the first light after a storm that had lasted too long. "You're early," he finally murmured, stepping aside. "I couldn't sleep," she said, slipping off her coat. "I kept thinking about you." Her words wrapped around him like warmth he didn't think he deserved. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" she smiled. "You still can't sleep without it?" "Old habits die hard." "So do old pains," she said softly. He froze, her words hitting closer than she realized. Or maybe she knew. She always did. Stephanie moved closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to pretend with me, Kenneth." "Not anymore." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "I'm not pretending." "Yes, you are," she said gently. "You're still punishing yourself for things that aren't yours to carry anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger, but with the truth. Then she stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, her touch soft but grounding. "You've spent years being strong for everyone else. Maybe it's time you let someone be strong for you." Her words cut through him, through every wall he'd built, and for the first time he didn't pull away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that came from years of holding everything back. His hands found her waist, her fingers tangled in his shirt. And for the first time in forever, the world didn't feel heavy. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I've missed you," she breathed. He swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have." "But I did." They stood there, wrapped in silence, the city humming beyond the glass. The pale morning light spilled gently across the room, brushing over soft skin and tangled sheets. Stephanie stood by the window, barefoot, wrapped in one of Kenneth's shirts. The fabric hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves grazing her fingertips, as she reached up to push back a strand of curls. Her hair caught the light, those soft black curls that framed her face. And for a moment, Kenneth forgot how to breathe. She looked almost unreal, not like a dream, but like a memory he'd been trying to remember all his life, something familiar, something that made sense in a world that hadn't for so long. The city outside was still cloaked in mist, its noise muted, its pulse gentle. But in here, in this quiet corner of morning, it was just them, and no ghosts, no guilt, no distance, She turned, caught his gaze, and smiled, that small, knowing smile that had undone him from the very beginning. "You're awake," she said softly. "I didn't want to miss this," he murmured. "This?" He gestured toward her, the light behind her, the quiet morning that felt like the first breath after drowning. "You," he said simply. Stephanie's heart squeezed. She walked over, sat beside him, her fingers brushing his jaw where the faintest shadow of stubble lingered. "You look different," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally stopped fighting the ghosts." She searched his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see that wall, the one built from guilt, from the past, from the pain he'd carried like armor. What she saw instead was something raw and unguarded. Kenneth reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the lines of her palm as if memorizing them. "Do you know what I thought about that night you came back?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "That I didn't deserve it, you any of it. I thought if you saw the parts of me I've been hiding, the fear, the shame, you'd run. But I didn't," she said gently. "No," he whispered, eyes glistening. "You stayed." Stephanie leaned her forehead against his. "Because you're not your past, Kenneth. You're the man who found the strength to face it. That's who I see." He swallowed hard. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said. "But love never is. It's choosing to stay even when it hurts." The room was still, save for the rhythm of their breathing. The air between them pulsed with warmth, not lust, something deeper, sacred even. Kenneth lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the inside of her wrist with reverence. "I used to think love was a weakness," he said quietly, "something that made you lose control. But now, it's the only thing that keeps me grounded. You keep me grounded." Stephanie smiled, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Then hold on," he did. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as if afraid she might disappear. But she didn't. She just melted against him, her heartbeat steady against his chest, a sound he wanted to carry forever. Minutes passed, maybe hours. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. When Stephanie finally stirred, her voice was soft. "You're still holding on," she teased lightly. Kenneth smiled against her hair. "I told you, I don't plan on letting go again." She looked up at him, eyes deep and steady. "Then don't. But promise me one thing, anything, when the darkness comes, and it will, don't shut me out. Don't fight it alone." He nodded, his voice thick. "I won't, not anymore." The city outside began to wake. Taxi horns, footsteps, the hum of life resuming. But inside that apartment, time seemed to pause. Kenneth leaned forward, pressing his lips to her forehead. A kiss that wasn't about desire or apology, but gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing the man I couldn't." Stephanie smiled faintly, brushing her fingers through his hair. "You don't have to thank me, Kenneth. Just love me, honestly, completely, without the fear." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a reminder of what he'd lost. He saw everything he'd found. When she leaned in to kiss him, it wasn't urgent. It was slow, steady, filled with the ache of everything they'd survived. It tasted like peace after war, like home after wandering. And when she whispered against his lips, "You're safe now," something inside him finally exhaled. For the first time in years, Kenneth Stanford believed it. The nights were quieter now, but quiet didn't mean peace. Kenneth had stopped waking up drenched in sweat, his chest pounding from dreams that used to feel like punishment. But sometimes, in the silence of 3 a.m., he could still hear it, the echo of her name, the ghost of a past he still couldn't bury. Stephanie stirred beside him, half asleep, the soft rhythm of her breathing grounding him in the present. Her head rested against his shoulder, one hand lazily tracing circles on his chest. It amazed him how something so simple could feel like salvation. He glanced down at her, her curls tumbling over his skin, the faint curve of her lips forming a sleepy smile. He could spend a lifetime memorizing her like this. "You're awake again," she murmured without opening her eyes. "Couldn't sleep. Bad dream?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just memories." She opened her eyes, studying him with that quiet knowing he both feared and needed. "You don't have to face them alone, you know. I don't want to drag you into it." "You're not dragging me anywhere, Kenneth," she whispered, pressing her palm over his heart. "I'm already here." Her touch was soft, but her words hit deep. He turned his head toward the ceiling. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," she said. "It's love." That word, love, used to terrify him. But from her it didn't feel like a demand, it felt like truth. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. The dawn light caught her skin, painting her in golden warmth, everything he thought he didn't deserve. "You still don't believe you're allowed to be happy," she said quietly. "You carry pain like it's a punishment." He stared at her, his throat tightening. "Because it is. I made choices, Stephanie. I hurt people. I don't get to just stop." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "You don't get to keep paying for something you've already bled for. At some point, you have to live." Her words cracked through his composure. He sat up too, facing her. "And if I don't know how?" She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. "Then let me remind you." Her hand reached for his, guiding it to her cheek. "This," she whispered, "this is how." The air between them shifted, tender, heavy, charged with something unspoken. His thumb brushed her skin. Her breath hitched. "I don't want to break you," he said, his voice barely audible. "You won't," she breathed. "You already did once, when you tried to walk away. And I'm still here." Something inside him gave way. All the guilt, the restraint, the fear. He kissed her, slow at first, then deeper, his hands finding her waist, her heartbeat syncing with his. When she pulled back, her voice trembled. "You don't have to hide from me anymore." He looked at her, searching her face for the truth she carried so effortlessly. "I've spent years pretending to be fine. You make me want to stop pretending." "Then stop," she whispered. The moment hung between them, quiet, raw, and real. He traced his fingers down her arm, his touch reverent, as if memorizing something sacred. Her breath caught as his lips brushed her shoulder, her collarbone, the place where her pulse raced beneath his touch. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about release, about finding safety in someone's arms after years of running from everything that hurt. When he finally looked up at her again, his eyes were glassy. "You make me feel like I can breathe again." She smiled softly, her hand threading through his hair. "Then don't stop." Their movements were unhurried, a rhythm that felt like forgiveness. Every kiss was a promise, every touch a confession. And in the dim light of morning, they weren't two broken souls anymore, just two people learning how to hold each other through the cracks. Later, she lay tangled against him, the room silent except for the sound of their breathing. He brushed his thumb over her shoulder, over a faint scar he hadn't noticed before. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She smiled, eyes still closed. "Life." He frowned. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." Her words lingered in the air, a reflection of everything he wanted to believe. He pressed a kiss to the mark, his voice low. "Then maybe there's hope for me too." She opened her eyes, looking up at him. "There's always hope, Kenneth. You just have to stop looking for it in the past." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. When she drifted back to sleep, Kenneth stayed awake a little longer, staring at the ceiling, tracing the sound of her breathing. For the first time, he wasn't haunted by silence. He was comforted by it, because for the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the dark. The pale morning light filtered through the blinds, soft and golden, touching the edges of the room. Stephanie stretched, still wrapped in one of Kenneth's shirts, and let out a quiet sigh. The night had passed gently, filled with whispers and quiet closeness, and now the day felt like a promise waiting to be kept. Later that afternoon, Kenneth sat back on the couch, the weight of Stephanie's presence beside him grounding every thought. The day had been quiet, too quiet. Perhaps, and yet somehow, full of unspoken truths. His laptop pinged softly, drawing his attention. Another email. He frowned, momentarily distracted from the warmth beside him. He hadn't expected anyone to reach out again. Not now. Not after all these years. He opened it. "Kenneth, my name is Clara Rhodes. I'm Emily's sister. I've watched quietly from a distance how you've carried her memory all these years. I'm not here to accuse, to confront, or to question, only to thank you, and perhaps, if you're willing, to meet. I think we both need a kind of closure, a chance to see that the person we lost is remembered, and that the pain we carried isn't ours alone." Kenneth leaned back, fingers tracing the edge of the laptop. He didn't know whether to feel relief, apprehension, or something else entirely. He thought of Emily, her smile, her stubbornness, the way she had lit up a room, and he thought of what he had done in her memory quietly, without recognition. The scholarship fund in her name, the memorial project for the accident victims, the letters he had written but never sent. He glanced at Stephanie, her head resting against his shoulder, her presence a tether to the present. "It's someone from her past," he said softly. "Her sister." Stephanie tilted her head, eyes steady. "Do you want to meet her?" He exhaled slowly. "I think, yes, for her, and maybe for me too, to see that she's remembered the right way." Stephanie's hand found his, thumb brushing reassuringly over his knuckles. "Then you won't have to face it alone." He looked down at her, feeling the weight of her support, the kind that made the world feel safer, even when the past reached toward him. "I'm grateful for you," he whispered. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "You just have to keep letting yourself live." Kenneth smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. The email had been a surprise. Yes, a ghost from a life he thought he had left behind, but with Stephanie there, and with Clara reaching out gently rather than accusingly, he realized that he didn't have to carry it all alone anymore. He opened the laptop again, drafting a reply. Not a confrontation, not an explanation, just acknowledgement. Just the beginning of closure for both of them. "Clara, thank you for reaching out. I would like to meet. It's important to me that Emily's memory is honored. And perhaps it will help both of us begin to heal." He paused before sending, then pressed send. The ping of the sent message was soft, but inside it echoed like a promise to Emily, to Clara, to Stephanie, and most of all to himself. He turned toward Stephanie, her eyes reflecting quiet warmth, and let himself simply be present, fully, in the calm after the storm. The city was alive that evening, the streets humming with life, lights flickering like stars scattered at ground level. But inside Kenneth's apartment, the world was softer, calmer. Stephanie stood by the kitchen counter, barefoot in one of his shirts, stirring pasta in a pot that was already boiling over. Her curls framed her face in a halo of disarray, and she laughed as he reached to turn down the stove behind her. "I told you I've got it," she said, smirking. "And I told you I don't trust you with my kitchen," he replied, leaning close enough for his breath to warm her ear. She nudged him with her elbow, but her smile stayed. "You mean our kitchen?" The word slipped out so naturally that it made him pause. It was such a simple thing, yet it carried a weight he wasn't sure his heart was ready for. He reached for the wine glasses, trying to disguise the tension behind a faint smile. "You make yourself at home too easily." She turned, catching his hand mid-motion, her eyes steady. "Maybe it's time you did too." Something in him softened and broken at the same time. Because for all his power, all his wealth, home was something he'd never learned how to keep. Dinner passed with laughter, teasing, stolen glances, the kind of quiet joy that made him forget what pain even felt like. Yet as the night deepened and the candles burned low, that old whisper of fear returned, crawling back into the edges of his mind. She noticed, of course. She always did. "Where did you just go?" she asked softly. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "Nowhere." Her eyes didn't waver. "Don't lie to me, Kenneth, not here." He sighed, leaning back. "It's strange, isn't it? How happiness feels like a trick. Like the moment you believe it, it'll vanish." Her voice softened. "That's not happiness's fault. That's pain teaching you not to trust it." He looked at her, really looked, at the woman who'd walked into his chaos and made it feel like peace. "What if I ruin it again?" "You won't," she said, "because this time you're not running from it." The silence stretched, heavy but safe. Then, almost shyly, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Kenneth, love doesn't come to heal you after you're whole. It stays to help you become it." He squeezed her hand, the words sinking deep into a place he'd kept locked for years. Later that night, when the city had gone quiet, they lay tangled together on the couch, the flicker of the television washing their skin in soft, muted light. Stephanie's head rested on his chest, her fingers drawing lazy patterns against his skin. "You still think too much," she murmured. "Occupational hazard," he replied, smiling faintly. She tilted her head up to look at him. "You can't think your way out of healing." He looked down at her, his expression softer than he realized. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said, "but it's worth it." Her voice carried that quiet certainty he could never argue with. He brushed his hand along her jaw, his thumb grazing the corner of her mouth. "You know what scares me most?" She waited, her eyes searching his. "That one day I'll wake up," he said, "and you'll realize I'm still broken underneath all this." Stephanie smiled, sad but sure. "Then I'll remind you that even broken things can still love deeply. Maybe even better." He didn't respond with words. He kissed her, slow and aching like the confession he couldn't speak. Her breath caught, her fingers clutching his shirt, as if grounding them both in that moment where pain and peace met halfway. The kiss deepened, growing heavier, desperate yet gentle, a language neither of them needed to translate. Every touch was a question, every breath an answer. When they finally broke apart, her forehead rested against his. "You don't have to keep earning love, Kenneth," she whispered. "You just have to let it stay." His chest tightened. "Then stay." Her eyes glistened. "I already am." They moved to the bedroom, their steps slow. Deliberate, not out of haste but reverence. He traced his hands over her, not to possess but to remember. Every touch was softer than before, not fire but warmth that reached bone deep. When he whispered her name against her skin, it sounded less like desire and more like prayer. And as dawn crept in, their bodies and breaths tangled in perfect rhythm. Kenneth realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing peace. He was holding it. Stephanie traced her fingers along his chest, her voice soft in the quiet after their closeness. "You've carried this for too long," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "You need to tell her everything. For you, for her. Face her one last time." Kenneth closed his eyes, letting her words settle, the weight of years pressing on him, and for the first time he felt ready. Kenneth walked through the cemetery alone, the chill of late autumn pressing against his coat. The world muted, except for the rustle of leaves under his steps. He had put off this moment for years, always finding excuses, always carrying the weight of her absence like a stone in his chest. But Stephanie's words had echoed in his mind all week. "You have to say it. For you, for her." Now standing in front of Emily Rhodes's grave, the name engraved in cold stone made his chest tighten. He sank to his knees, hands brushing the snow from the edges of the marble. "Emily, I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words trembling in the frigid air. "I should have said it all before. I should have held you, told you I loved you even in anger. I should have." His throat constricted, memories crashing like waves, 7 years of waking with her absence pressing on him, 7 years of every success shadowed by guilt. Every morning he'd carried her laughter in his mind, her light in his heart, and yet he had lived as if he owed the world nothing but silence and control. "Emily, I've tried to honor you," he continued, voice breaking. "My way of making amends, the scholarship fund, the memorials, the letters I never sent. But none of it feels enough. None of it ever will." He bowed his head, allowing tears to streak down, some landing on the stone, others soaking into the snow at his knees. "You changed my life," he said softly. "You gave me everything, and I failed to protect you in that moment when it mattered most. I've carried that pain every day, every hour, every time I thought I could be whole. I felt your absence like a hollow ache in my chest. And yet, I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't know how to love, how to let someone in, how to forgive myself, if it weren't for what you gave me, even in the tragedy of losing you. You made me human, Emily, and I finally understand that I can honor you by living, by loving honestly, by not letting the shadow of that night consume the rest of my life." He pressed his palm to the cold stone, as if trying to feel her pulse beneath it. "I wish I could tell you all this in person. I wish you could see Stephanie, see how she's been my anchor, how she's helped me start breathing again. I know you would have liked her. I hope you do. I hope you know that your memory lives not just in grief, but in how I try to be better, for myself, for others, for her." He lingered, letting the words fall in whispers, allowing the grief, the love, and the guilt to intermingle, raw and undiluted. Finally he stood, brushing snow from his coat, looking down at her grave one last time. "I love you, Emily," he murmured. "I always will. Stephanie, I did it. I told her everything. Every regret, every memory, every word I wanted her to hear. I feel lighter, and somehow closer to her. Thank you for encouraging me. I don't think I could have done it without you." Almost immediately a reply buzzed back. "Kenneth, I know she heard you, and I know she's proud of you. But I'm even prouder. Proud of you for facing this, for being vulnerable, for choosing to heal. Come home, love. I'll be here." He took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs, the snow sparkling around him. Turning away, he walked back toward the city, the weight on his chest lighter, the quiet ache softened, carrying Emily's memory with reverence and Stephanie's love with hope. The snow had come early that year. It drifted softly outside Kenneth's window, blanketing the city in white silence, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore, the kind that whispered peace. Kenneth stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, the city lights painting his reflection in gold and blue. There was something different about his eyes, a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there before. The man staring back wasn't the haunted version of himself he'd come to know. He was still scarred, yes, but he was no longer running from the scars. Behind him, Stephanie's laughter echoed from the other room, light, effortless, filling the apartment like music, the sound that had become his favorite song. He smiled faintly, slipping his cufflinks into place. "You're going to make me late," he called. Her voice drifted from the bedroom. "For what?" "You never told me where we're going." "That's the point," he said, walking toward her. She stood by the window, her reflection caught between candlelight and snowlight, wearing a black dress that made her skin glow. Her hair framed her face in soft curls, and when she turned to look at him, it was the same look that had undone him on the subway years ago. "Where are you taking me, Mr. Stanford?" she teased. "You'll see." He offered his hand. She took it. The drive through Manhattan was quiet. The streets shimmered with snow, and Christmas lights flickered in every shop window. Stephanie rested her head on his shoulder as they passed through the heart of the city where they'd both been broken, and where somehow they'd found each other. "You've been different lately," she said softly. He glanced at her, smiling faintly. "Different good or different bad?" "Different. Lighter," she said, "like you finally stopped holding your breath." He looked back at the road, his voice low. "Maybe because for the first time, I have something worth breathing for." Her hand tightened around his. When they arrived, she blinked in surprise. The train station. The same one where they'd met. She turned to him slowly. "Kenneth?" He stepped out, offering her his hand again. "Come with me." The station was almost empty at this hour. The same echo of footsteps, the same rush of cold air as the trains passed. He led her to the same platform, the same seat where it had all begun. Stephanie looked around, smiling through tears. "You remembered." "I never forgot." She laughed softly. "You still haven't told me why we're here." He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "Because this is where I met the woman who taught me how to forgive myself." Her smile faltered, emotion breaking through. "Kenneth." He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers trembling slightly. "For a long time, I thought love was something I had to earn, something I had to deserve. But then you came along and showed me that love. Real love, it doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks for presence." He dropped to one knee. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Kenneth," he looked up at her, blue eyes glistening under the dim light. "Stephanie Williams, you walked into my darkness without asking for light. You saw the worst in me and still chose to stay. You're the reason I can finally say I'm not afraid to love again. You are my peace, my second chance, my home." He opened the small velvet box. Inside, a simple diamond gleamed, elegant, timeless. "So this time," he said softly, "I'm not asking for forever because I'm scared to lose you. I'm asking because I finally know what it means to keep you." Tears fell silently down her cheeks. "Kenneth," he smiled, his voice breaking, "marry me." For a heartbeat, the world went still. The same stillness that had once existed between them on that train years ago. Then she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." He stood, and she was already in his arms before the word fully left her lips. The crowd around them, strangers waiting for trains, clapped softly, their applause fading into the echo of the city beyond. He kissed her, slow and certain, his hand cupping her face, as snow began to fall through the open arches above. It wasn't the kind of kiss that promised perfection. It was the kind that promised truth. The wedding came months later, a quiet ceremony overlooking the East River. The sky was streaked with amber and rose, and the city stretched behind them like a witness to their beginning. Stephanie walked down the aisle barefoot, carrying a single white daisy in her hand, the same flower that once marked the start of everything. When she reached him, Kenneth's eyes softened, a single tear slipping free. "You kept the daisy," he whispered. "I kept the reminder," she said, "that sometimes the universe gives you what you didn't know you needed." He took her hand. "And sometimes it gives you what you thought you didn't deserve." The vows were simple, raw, honest. She promised to love him not despite his scars, but through them. He promised to never again hide from the light she saw in him. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Kenneth kissed her like a man reborn, not from guilt but from grace. And later, as they danced under the soft glow of city lights, she leaned into him, her voice a whisper against his chest. "Do you still hear the song?" He smiled, brushing his lips against her hair. "Every day. What does it say now?" He looked out over the skyline, the same city that once haunted him, and whispered, "It says I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." She looked up at him, smiling through tears. Because you're my light," the song that had once haunted him. "Don't get too close." Its dark inside no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a memory of a man who once feared love, and the woman who taught him that even demons can learn to love in the light. And that concludes Kenneth and Stephanie's journey. A reminder that love has the power to heal, to guide us through our darkest moments, and to help us finally forgive ourselves. Thank you for walking with them, for witnessing their pain, their courage, and their love. If their story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a story that speaks to the soul.